So, you want to do that thing, but on the other hand, you don't want to do it, or you want to do something else, or it means giving up something, or the cost is too high. Values conflict, eh? Ambivalence. Well, I suppose there's a few things to know about ambivalence. The first is that it's normal. Everyone's plagued by it. Second of all, ambivalence is a place where we can get stuck for a long, long time, because if we're stuck and we can't see a way out of it, because obviously we're stuck, I kind of believe that if we weren't stuck, we wouldn't be stuck. And we're stuck there because we haven't worked our way out of it yet. So either it's an issue of perspective or perception, or it's inability of making a decision. Unable, unwilling, lack of resource, lack of options, whatever it is. And ambivalence comes in different flavours. So we have for lack of a word, the first kind, which is where we're torn between two positives. So, I've got a finite resource. I can either have the cake or I can have the mystery prize. You can't have both. Which do you pick? And Dan Heath suggested in his book, what was his book called? Was it called Decisive? I think it was called Decisive. I might revisit that actually. I think it was called Decisive, wasn't it? He said, when you face this kind of dilemma and you're framing things as an either or, try and find a way to do both. Okay, so anyway, let's just rattle them off. So we've got the either or, I want to go for that and I want to go for the other, but I recognise that I can't do both for whatever reason. Then there's its opposite, the horrible, shitty decisions of being between a shit place and another shit place. Rock and a hard place, or the deep blue sea. Take your pick. Each one's shitty. I don't want to do either. Really don't want to do either. But how do you decide? And the one that drives us nuts is the one that's fuzzy. And I call it fuzzy because it's a weird situation where you're torn between two things, both of which you want to do, but at the same time don't want to do. And so you go around this like figure of eight, and it almost feels like an infinity loop, because you start over here with the first thing that you want to do, but also that means that you've got to do something you don't want to do. So you look at the second option, which you might want to do, but that also comes with baggage that you don't want to do. So I'll flip back to the first option, and a second option. Well, maybe first. And it just goes round and round and round and round. It just drains you so much. So what's the best solution to all these? Forget about them. Ignore them. Go into denial. Next thing, you wake up and you were 55 years old and you wonder what the fuck just happened. Yesterday when you went to bed you were only 35. So as I mentioned in the previous audio, there's something called the Benjamin list. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, list the pros and cons, whichever side's longest gets it. It's not that easy. I've never found that helpful for myself, and I probably ought not really repeat it. I mean, you might find utility in it, I don't know. It's maybe a useful thing to do just to get your ideas down on paper, because it's like writing a book. They say come up with 10 chapters, and then those are the easy ones. Come up with another 10 chapters. Those are the harder ones, the more obscure ones. And then when you've got that second list of 10, throw away the first one, because anyone could write that book. And now you've got the list of 10 chapters that you really had to think about. And now break each chapter down into 10 topics. And you know what's coming? Yeah, anyone could write those first 10 topics. Now it really stretches your mind to think about the next 10 topics in the first chapter. And when you've got the second list of 10, throw away the first, because anyone could have written that. And now concentrate on that second list of 10 and repeat across the 10 chapters. So it's just writing down on a bit of paper gets those first 10 out of the way so you can think more deeply, because it's a lot to remember, we only go to the first 3 or 4, think that's too hard, give up, abandon it. Then we'll recycle the first 2 or 3, try and minimise it. Is there any way I can get around these, through these, under these? what if it wasn't that bad? Can I minimise it? But then, and what's the third option again? Yeah, well, maybe I'll go back to, and you just end up cycling. But if you sometimes break through and write down 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, you really start to stretch the mind now. And just in that exercise, it might generate a new thought or change perception about things, which may lead to the breakthrough. So it might help, but I don't think just writing down a list and then going for the one that's got the longer list is necessarily the best. As I said before, and Bob Iger said it as well in his book, and Steve Jobs also said it, so I do put a bit of weight in their advice that some line items carry significant more weight than other line items. So taking a bit of a lesson out of the NLP model, I mean, I refer it to the NLP model, I'm sure NLP didn't, well, they just codified it. I'm sure these techniques existed long before anything was called NLP. So I think I briefly mentioned it in the previous audio. List down your top 10 values. How do you do that? Start with a question. What's important to you in life or the area of concern? What's important to you about work? What's important to you about health? What else is important? What else? What else? What else? What else is important? And what else? Right, there you go. There's your top 10. All right. So now look at that list. Rank them. And, you can do this intuitively. Blah, 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 blah. All right. So we've got an approximate list. And then you can check the ranking. So look at number 1 and number 2. Which one's more important, 1 or 2? And if you struggle with the comparison, say, well, if I had to give one of those up, which one would I give up? And if you'd rather give up number 1 than number 2, then number 2 belongs in the number 1 spot. So it's kind of like a comparison sort. I don't know whether we could do it. Yeah, it's a bubble sort. If you know what a bubble sort algorithm, that's what this is. So you're comparing each pair down a list and repeat and repeat and repeat until there's no changes. And then if there's no changes in swapping values against each other, then that's your list. And in order. Right. Okay, good. So the first value. Why is this an important value? In what ways is it an important value? Write that down. What's important about this value? Write that down. List some examples in your life that confirm that this is an important value to you. So the time when you made a decision about something that involved this core value was, what was the circumstances, what led up to it, what was the decision, and what was the outcome? And, the kind of question is, why is it important to you? Why do you think it's important? Write a few sentences following those questions for each value. And then, well, maybe do that, then, pause the audio, then do that, because the next bit gives away the trick. So on the basis that you've done that exercise, look at the language in your responses about why these values are important, and look in the language of your writing and see if you can pick up whether what you've written is in the style of moving towards something. So it gets me this, or it moves me towards this, or it means that I'll be enabled to do this, or it means more time with family, or it means more time to do these other things. Or is it more a language of, well, it prevents me from doing this, or it stops me from doing that, or it keeps me away from this, or it makes it so that these things don't come at me, or it means that this stays away from me, or it means that I avoid that. And so there should be a clear motivation with each value. Now, is this value associated with your move towards motivation, or is this value associated with a move away from? Now, at the moment, we're talking about doing this for self, because it's a good exercise to go through for self. And then one of the things to realize, I suppose, is to get to a destination, you need to know where you are, where the destination is, and the vector that'll get you there. So you need a direction. When you're moving away from something, any direction will do. And it's not necessarily towards anything, it's just away from something. The trick is to get the move away direction that we choose to move away from something aligned with the vector that points to moving towards the things that we are motivated towards. So then we kind of get this propulsion system, because sometimes our move away strategy tends to move us away from something in the opposite direction of something else that would move towards. But if we can tweak the move away so that we move away from that in a way that helps us move towards what we're already moving towards in our towards motivation, it becomes an additive rather than a net neutralizer. So now we've done this exercise for self, it should be almost clear and obvious as to how to use it when we're listening to somebody else. It's those little questions. Why is that important to you? What does that do for you? And listen for their language. Is it moving them away, or is it helping them avoid something, or is it moving them towards something? Now, this exercise is cognitively pretty heavy. because you're listening to people, you're also employing reflexive and simple feedback or reflections, and you're also using open-ended questions with a ratio of 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. Plus also you're picking up on what's important to them, monitoring for their value statements, and then on those value statements eliciting whether they're moving towards or away from. So it's a lot to do. It's quite a heavy, and they talk about active listening. Well, this is it. Here we are. This is what it is all about, and it's not easy. It's not trivial. It's bloody hard work. And with that, I think we're just about wrapping it up now. So it's the same old, easy in theory, if you can remember it all, and then to remain calm in the heat of battle and execute the plan coolly and calmly. And perhaps this is the exception to the rule: easier said than done, easier listened than done. And speaking of which, it's a strange thing as well, just to mention quickly about conflict, because that's what it's all about as far as I can tell. Resolving conflicts, moving people through their ambivalence, seeing what common traits we have. And even here, as I speak, we've got Boris trying to do a deal with Europe. There's not even a proposal out yet. And I'm wondering what's taking them so long. I mean, obviously there's some machinations going on in the background. God knows what they're up to. But it starts with a proposition, a publication of a proposal. Here's our values. Here's what we want. What does Europe want? What are their values? Where's the easy ones, the ones that overlap? Great. Integrate those. And then work up the ladder. Where's the ones that are not so close together, a bit further apart? Okay, what work do we need to do on both sides to bridge that gap? And then work our way up the tree. Okay, what values do we disagree on? Can they be bridged? What needs to go into that so that the values are not so far apart? Or can we think of new values upon which to base new agreements? But the strange thing is, as soon as we make a judgment about someone else, make them the other, the enemy, the dirty European Union, the mistrusted European Union, the all-controlling European Union, how the fuck can we do negotiations with that in mind? Because if it's in our minds that they are the other side, the enemy, what's the point in listening to them? And if we can't listen to them, how are we going to find out what their values are so that we can get, again, I use the word in agreement with those values, not about those values, but at least lean into it to start the understanding. I'm sure there's diplomats in the UK that already know the answer to these questions. I mean, only a couple of months ago they were, I presume, active before we officially left on the 31st of Jan. International relations, eh? But this is what happens. It's ambivalence, can't decide, paralyzes meetings, halts legislation. So yeah, I mean, leaning in to get understanding. Sometimes going all the way is just the beginning. So in that endeavour, it's maybe worth a quick reminder. It's not about being clever. It's not about scoring points. It's not about winning bigly. It's not about judging or labelling or assuming that you already know. Even if you did know, things might have changed. They might have had a change of heart or a snap of perspective. We need to recalibrate. So we need to get curious. We need to let go of the roadblocks that we've talked about. We need to do a bit more mirroring, a bit more pacing, use reflective commentary or reflective feedback, simple and complex. A few open-ended questions. Establish or work out, figure out, take time to understand what they mean as accurately as you can. Ask them to feed back what they heard you say about your feelings, your emotions, and your concerns. And when you hear that come back, devoid of judgment language that implies any wrongdoing, you're getting there. You've got an understanding at least of both positions. So these techniques can de-escalate anger, get both sides curious about learning some more, and it paves the way for conflict resolution, which is another big motherfucking book I've got to read. 1,200 bastard pages to get through this motherfucker. Anyway, we'll get on to that one. One of the other things as well I just wanted to mention in passing, and I've got this covered in the Deconstructing Greatness Facebook group. In there I've got 103 videos on faults in thinking, cognitive biases, logical fallacies. Oh god, yeah, I covered them all. Well, there's not, actually, no, I only covered about 100 of them. There's probably 200-300 logical fallacies. It's worth going through the list. But one of them in there, the logical fallacy of black and white thinking, it's so pervasive, it's startling. I never knew people thought in these terms before I really came across this logical fallacy. The either-or dichotomy. Well, it's either something I can understand or therefore it's not real. And I see this in the flat earth community and the science deniers and the anti-vax. One of the most putrid things I heard in anti-vax is that there's too many vaccines. I just got a feeling that it's too many. One is too many. And I go, well, based on what? Well, it's just too many. Yeah, okay, but based on what? Well, based on the fact I don't understand how they work, therefore any is too many. Same with flat earth. They don't understand the science behind rockets and airplanes, and because they can't understand it, the only other alternative is that explanation must be wrong because they're right. And it just staggers me, the misunderstanding, the basic flaws in thinking to do with misconstruing things, conflating things, just not understanding basic principles of physics. I shouldn't be surprised. I'm sure you've seen the videos too on YouTube of people being made fun of because they can't locate their own country on a world map. So this black and white thinking, it devolves into polarization because the group that can't understand or doesn't understand, a strange phenomenon occurs because the people, say for example in the flat earth or the anti-vax, they all have their different reason for being a flat earther. One might say, oh, because rockets are impossible. Another might say because space doesn't exist. Another might say because the moon landings couldn't possibly have happened. Another one might say because gravity doesn't exist. So these are all incoherent, and some of them actually contradict another. But as soon as the identification is made, I don't believe in gravity, therefore flat earth, they'll bond with someone else who says, well, I don't believe in rockets, therefore flat earth. And so they don't question each other about, well, why don't you believe in rockets? Or why don't you believe that gravity isn't a thing? Or why don't you believe that space is a thing? It's just that we all believe the earth is flat. And they don't check each other's work. Because it tells me that they don't understand enough to check each other's work. Because if they actually ask somebody, well, why don't you think gravity is a thing? They'll get an incoherent answer, which reveals the flaw in their own thinking, that their pet disbelief might be that they don't believe in space, but they can't explain it. It's just they don't believe in it. And as we've said many times on the channel, belief's got nothing to do with facts, data, evidence, or even coherent arguments. It's just can be installed for any reason, for no reason. But then they get together and they all identify under the moniker flat earther against the globers, and now we get globetards and flat-tards. Polarization, and I think it's a bit disingenuous in the flat earth community because many of them don't want to believe. They don't want to be educated. They'll hand wave and say, oh, you know, maths isn't a thing, so we can't use maths. Telescopes use lenses, so we discount those as well. Yet they'll use cameras to take photographs of the horizon and say, oh, look, see, it's flat. It's just incoherent. I get the same vibe from a lot of religion. I mean, I understand why people have their religions, but it's the same kind of mindset. If you probe it too hard, it falls apart. And that's what really bugs me, is that critical thinking is waved aside for a juvenile preference into something that they know or suspect may not be true if it was probed too hard. So I've even heard people say even if it was proved to be false, they would still hope they had enough faith to believe anyway. I mean, wow, you know, there's all sorts of reasons for that. Again, I understand, you know, taking away someone's answer to life, someone's reason for being, you got to replace it with a better one. So I understand. Might not agree in this case, but at least I understand. But yeah, I mean, I've been on many debates online with flat earthers and religions, and all of them set out to showcase their stance, whether it's atheism or religious dogma or belief in a god, whether it's flat earth, globe earth. It's set up obviously on YouTube for entertainment and clicks, so they want the contentious videos, they want the arguments, they want the dumpster fires, it's a show. Very few of them actually do critical debate, and the guys who really seem to know their shit have said, you know, I don't do debates because it just devolves into a shit show and a dumpster fire. We're just shouting over each other. And I think I'm struggling to remember one debate I've seen, either religious or flat earth or anti-vax, where, say for example, someone in the science camp who would debunk the flat earth or would debunk the anti-vaxxer, or would take the position generally of evolution and science, has never actually asked the other side, what do you get out of believing these things? They've never started there. They've never asked about the person and their beliefs and why they have them. They might have asked how you got that belief, and it'd be like, oh, I was in a Facebook group and, I did research flat earth and I watched some YouTube videos and it convinced me. But they never ask, and what do you get out of holding those beliefs? What does it do for you? I never heard that asked. So again, there's no understanding. They all charge in to prove their point. I mean, they do prove their point. They bring the facts, the data, the reasons, all the evidence, and prove it without a shadow of a doubt that any person with sense and rational thinking and application of logic is forced to come to the conclusion that the earth isn't flat, but of course won't change their minds. So yeah, it just devolves into talking at each other and not to each other. And they provoke an argument rather than some kind of investigation based around curiosity. So I guess the lesson is listen more. When we find ourselves in conflict, start by empathic listening, using simple and complex reflective statements, open-ended questions. Try restating their perspective using non-judgmental terms and inquire as to whether you got it right. Then ask the other person to listen to your perspective, and then ask them to tell you what they heard. And as we've mentioned, when they can reflect that without judgment, we are at least in agreement in what the other has said, and what we heard them say is quite an accurate representation of what they said. And from there, maybe there's something in common that we can build on. And then from there we can ask, okay, what would we like to have happen next? And from there we can ask, okay, what are we willing to do? What resolutions might be possible from here? Alright, so there, listen. Nonviolent communication, conflict resolution, basic introduction. Alright, the end.